Welcome to the Steve Has a Chat podcast, where I call someone out of the blue with the record button on and hope to have an unscripted conversation about Microsoft business applications. Let's see how it goes. Enjoy.
Hello, it's Charles Lamanna.
Charles, Steve Mordue, how's it going?
Hey, Steve. I guess this is being recorded, huh?
You bet. This is our third time. Have you got some time?
I do. Always. I have a lot of time locked in my house right now. So.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for people who are listening to this in the future. We are recording this on March 27th. We're all, the country's kind of on lockdown, and we're still heading upward, so we don't know where this thing will go or end or what things will look like, but that's kind of where we are now, and the whole campus has been basically shut down, right, except for essential people. You're all working from home.
Yeah, for a little over 3 weeks now, actually. So we did MVP Summit from home. We did the Partner Advisory Council from home. We even did a virtual offsite where 4 days we all joined a Teams meeting for 8 hours each day. So.
Oh, my God. How are you finding it? I mean, compared to going in the office and being, with the team, I mean, was massive loss of productivity or stuff, or is it still okay?
It's there definitely is a slight loss of productivity. It's not as bad as I thought it would be, but I mean, I never thought I'd miss my office so much. I really miss just, you get used to it for a few years, you get everything in place. So
yeah. There's a bunch of businesses. I look out my apartment window to downtown Tampa of all these office buildings that are full of, law firms and all sorts of people, a bunch of cubicle farms within them with people that could actually be doing their job from anywhere and could have for years.
Yeah.
And now, of course, are. And I'm wondering how many of these companies that were like reluctant to do remote felt like I need to keep eyes on you. By the time we get through this, we'll have figured out how to do it remote. I wonder how many of those remote workers will end up coming back to an office.
Yeah,
it could be a huge shift.
Oh, it definitely will. It's just interesting. I was in a talk yesterday. We were talking about how when the original SARS outbreak happened, that actually is what launched e-commerce and APJ. It was around then. It's when JD.com and Ali, basically like mobile ordering, took off during that time because people were locked at home. And then the rest is history, right? Those are the second largest e-commerce properties out there in the world, second only to Amazon. So definitely, I would imagine the way people work and the technology people use will be fundamentally different on the other side of this. So,
well, I'll tell you what, it's almost prescient the way you guys decided to invest deeply in Teams over the past year before any of this was out there. And now looking back, that's looking like a really brilliant move.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of impact. A lot of people are in trouble, but it's so exciting to be able to use something like Teams to do like remote learning and telehealth and just video plus chat plus meetings integrated. Teams is really the only one doing that right now, and it's just phenomenal for someone working remote or like working virtually like us right now. So,
you said we did recently go through MVP Summit, which converted into a virtual event kind of at the last minute, and it was not horrible for a virtual event, first time scrambled together. But I'm also wondering about events in the future, if this may change a lot of events into virtual events, even when they don't need to be anymore. But it feels like the technology needs to get one step better on the idea. It wasn't really built for virtual events at scale like that.
Yeah.
But it seems like you guys are in a spot to really, we could figure that out and make a virtual event actually, built specifically for that purpose. And potentially get rid of a lot of future, because I tell you, there's no executive out there that's happy about approving travel expenses for his team to go to some in-person event. If he could sit at home or sit online, all for it.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is I read Ben Thompson. He has a article called Stratechery, and it's one of my favorite things to read. And he talks about is this the end of large conferences? Because when you move to all digital and you realize you get such bigger reach, I mean. You can get 100,000 people, no problem. That's hard. That's almost impossible to do in person. Yeah. And for a fraction of the cost, and it can be way more tailored, and you don't have to worry about double booking. that's another example where maybe things start to change fundamentally in the future.
And I think conferences for years have been more about, or at least equally about, the social aspect, seeing people in person, going out to the bar after the event, having fun, going out to dinner, seeing some town, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that part, of course, is probably what caused a lot of people to want to go to a con. I mean, I have buddies, well, guys you and I both know, that go to a conference and don't go to any sessions. Guys like myself and Mark Smith, we don't go to any sessions. We just go out there, we do that little live thing, like we had you on and stuff like that, just for fun, and mainly are out there for the drinking. So we're gonna miss it.
Yeah. Well, the one thing too is like just having a group of 20. Like that's the other thing I've learned. For like Teams is amazing. Like 4 people, you can have a really good conversation or a big broadcast. But if you want to have like a group discussion, it's kind of hard. And that's something that works so well because you get all these people together that would never be in the room at the same time in person at these conferences, and you can have some really interesting conversations. But
that would be the thing to figure out because, in person, like MVP Summit, you guys get up in front of, 100 of us, and we're all kind of raising our hand, taking our turns, asking questions until we run you guys off the stage in fear. But now in this virtual, I mean, there's no real raise your hand. It's just, the loudest person, the one that doesn't stop talking, gets to continue until his question is out of his mouth. And that's that would be an area that it seems like they could do some improvement.
Yeah, I think one of the features we're going to ship is raise your hand in Teams. So you can press the button to raise your hand. I can't wait for that.
Oh, that would be awesome. So you could mute everybody and they'd have to raise their hand. And there you go. That's already heading the direction it would need to, because that's what you'd need really for some kind of a virtual conference.
Yeah. That way also I can just never answer you when you raise your hand. No, I'm just kidding.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's Steve raising his hand again. Yep. We'll just ignore him.
Yep.
A lot of stuff that you guys announced at Summit, at MVP Summit, and of course, as everybody knows, that's mostly NDA for now, so we can't talk about a lot of that stuff. But there's a couple of things that we could talk about. One theme I think I heard, which I wouldn't think is NDA, was this idea of make everything we have work better. And when you guys are building like you've been building at the pace you've been building, I mean, it's like somebody threw matches in a box of fireworks, the stuff that's coming out. It takes a while for all of those wires to get connected and everything to be, singing like you'd want it. And sometimes it's like, this is working darn good. Let's get this other thing launched. And then we get a bunch of stuff that's working darn good, but not perfect. So it definitely feels like there's a motion now to let's go back over kind of top of all this awesome stuff we've launched, and let's connect those last few wires. Let's get this stuff really working as good as it can work. Is that a fair statement?
That's exactly right. And like the mantra we keep repeating internally is end to end, because what you'll see is there'll be components that work well individually, but there'll just be huge seams or gaps when you try to wire them up together. And our whole vision has been that you want to wire these things together, right? That's why we talk about one Dynamics 365, one Power Platform. So we have this big focus on making sure scenarios that span applications or expand parts of the platform actually work well end to end. And it's going in and wiring those things up and spackling over the creases and putting a new coat of paint on it. It's not fundamental, but and it's not necessarily something that will pop in a demo or in a keynote, but it'll just make a huge difference for our customers. And we see it already. Like we track our Net Promoter Score very closely. Yep. Like what are the makers and users like rate the product as they leverage it? And we just see it as we systematically improve these end-to-end experiences, that Net Promoter Score just keeps going up and up and up and up. So,
I know we're a one Microsoft now, which is a nice term, but in reality, these are lots of groups that are focused on their things. You got the Office group focusing on their things, Biz Apps focusing on theirs, Azure focusing on theirs. And you've got within your own group of bag things like ERP and Power Platform that they're wiring there you're working on. And at least that's kind of in your realm. You can make that happen. But then you get, Azure AD group, go do something out there that messes up something for us. Or you talk about a gap maybe between something we're doing over here and something that's happened over on the Office side. And those are kind of things that you don't have direct control. You got to try and influence and almost make a case internally to those teams that, hey, this is good, or get Satya to make a case, get somebody to make the case.
Yeah, and I think like that is a challenge. Just as any organization gets bigger, you have, like, I'd say it's not perfectly well mixed, right? Kind of like the ocean, right? The ocean's big
Yeah.
enough, it's not perfectly well mixed. Um, but I think the fact that it's actually a cultural tenet of Microsoft now to operate in the one Microsoft interest, you see people listening and being willing to have the dialogue on, is this truly better at the macro level? Is this a global maxima for Microsoft to go do this capability, even if the things you directly own, it's maybe not a maxima for you? And this kind of opens the door to have that dialogue of, hey, we need this feature for, say, the Outlook agaves so that our Outlook mail app can be better and we can get people off the comm at it. Like, that's an example of a really tight partnership between Outlook and us. And systematically, the Outlook team is completely willing and has shipped feature after feature to go make that Dynamics and Power Apps mail app richer and richer. So, and just like the most recent example is to finally bring delegation to the mail app. And that's come over the last 3.5 months. So, just that definitely is a challenge, but it's eminently surmountable and solvable.
I would imagine there's some degree of quid pro quo, right? I mean, hey, you guys help me out with this. I know there's nothing in it for you, but it'll help me. And then, when I have an opportunity later to help you guys out, so we're all kind of open arm instead of crossed arms, when some approaching these other things. So how big is your list of things you owe other people?
Yeah, for power apps, I owe a lot. No, but what's great is a lot of these things aren't like zero sum, in that in order for it to be good for one product or one team at Microsoft, it has to be bad for the other. The reality is Power Apps inside of Teams, I'll use that as an example. As Power Apps, we're very excited about that because customers are asking for an integrated experience inside Teams. I want it on my left rail for the app bar, or I want it as a tab inside my channel. Those are real customer demands. And on the other side, Teams wants to go support as many line of business applications as possible inside Teams. And we all know what's the fastest way to go create a bunch of line of business apps. It's not to go write code, it's to go use a low code solution like Power Apps. So you actually can go help accelerate the platform and the line of business awareness in Teams. And you can go at Power Apps, reach new customers at a broader base just by doing that one feature. So it is a very much win-win situation, and adopting that mentality through one Microsoft, that really the Microsoft cloud is what customers want, and customers want to go trust and transact with Microsoft and not individual product teams, is just a cultural shift that has really grown under Satya with great success. So I would say, like, I don't know if a product like Power Apps could have been successful 15 years ago. But it definitely, we have the environment where you can have something like Power Apps embedded in SharePoint, embedded in Teams, the platform for Dynamics, and a standalone business, and having that not be dissonance or in conflict.
It's interesting. I think that the companies that have embraced Teams, and it was frankly a slow go to get people to bite on, because it looked a lot different than what they were used to and how they did business. But now the ones that have really gone into it are like, I mean, they're maniacal about Teams. Teams is like their new desktop. I mean, they're operating in Teams all day long now. And like, I can't imagine how we ever did anything before Teams. So we're still at that inflection point with Teams where I think there's a huge number of customers yet to kind of discover what a lot of customers have about how transformative that could be. So yeah, to have Power Apps along for that ride, I think that ride's just getting started. You know, it's interesting these times right now, there's an awkwardness about marketing or promoting things that make sense because of a virus. You know, for example, I tactfully tried to write a couple of posts here recently and stood back and was thinking, does that look opportunistic? But, the one was this idea that I mentioned earlier, lots of people sending people home to work from home. Well, these companies that have had on-premise systems and still have them, been reluctant to move to the cloud, that move to remote workforce is going to be much more complicated than it would have been for those that had already gone full cloud. People just logging in, they got all the security they need to get. Some of these VPN solutions just were never designed or invested enough into to support the entire workforce. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah. I think like the way we view it is, number one, things have changed right now. Like, that's just the reality, right? People are in different working environments. People are under different economic pressure. There's very real frontline response necessary to go and combat COVID-19 out in the field. So like things have changed. That's number one. And the second thing that we've kind of adopted is because things have changed, we need to be flexible. And like if you look across what we've done at Microsoft, even just specifically in the area that I work on, we took the April release or the 2020 Wave 1 release. Originally, it was going to be mandatory upgrade in April. Talking to a lot of customers, they said, we can't get the workforce to test it. Please don't do this change. We can't take it. So we extended the opt-in window for the Wave 1 release to May for an extra month. And we'll keep evaluating stuff like that constantly. But we did that, and that's a big change for us because we really have trumpeted that like clockwork. It's always in April. It's going to come. But we just felt like that was the right thing to do. Or we've also done a bunch of programs where for 6 months you can get Power Apps or Dynamics CE free if you're in healthcare, hospitals, life science, or government organization. Because we want to go help. So there's literally dozens and dozens and dozens of state, local government, hospitals that we're working with right now inside my team. And we wanted to make sure we could help them in a way where it was clear we were not trying to profiteer off of the crisis, right? So it is
that fine line, though, right? Because obviously there'll be lots of these folks that'll take you up on those opportunities, and then when all this stuff passes, at some point you guys are going to reach out and say, hey, that thing we were giving you for free for so long, we kind of like it back, or have you start paying? And it is that kind of fine line about, the super cynics could look at it very cynically, I guess. Yeah. The other thing that is interesting to me, I was talking about how in this time of business, revenue is going to be a challenge for businesses right now. I mean, revenue is going to drop for most businesses that are, out there. There'll be certain businesses certainly that will, in every crisis, there's always some businesses that do better than others, but most are going to have a little downturn. And their revenue growth is going to be largely out of their control at the moment. I mean, government could shut down, the people that are buying your product, or who knows. And it's not something you could control like you could before. So what you can control, though, is your cost. That's really all you can control right now. It's a cost side, and both those drop to the bottom line the same way, right?
Yeah.
And, obviously laying off people are doing that, but it seems like the time for people to really look into their organization for where we're losing in money is leaking out. Because when I look at historically to solve a problem like that, maybe with a business application, we're looking at Dynamics 365 or Salesforce or some big applications, cost a lot of money, a lot of time to get implemented to plug a leaky ship that's losing some money. Where now with Power Apps, we really have the ability to go, let's identify those leaks. Let's spin up a Power App in a week or 2 weeks and solve this problem. We're doing one right now for a Fortune 500 company that discovered $50,000 a month. And in a big company, you can not notice that. I would notice it, but they didn't notice until someone suddenly noticed it. We're literally going to plug that hole with a Power App at a total development cost of about $15,000. And it's just amazing. I mean, amazing when you think about how many of those sorts of things. And now's a good time for people to really focus on where's money leaking out of your business. And there's some lower cost, low code, quick tools now that could potentially plug those leaks that we didn't even have before.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we look at as a company, we actually view Power Apps and Power Automate together as two products that we envision doing quite well even during an economic downturn for that reason. Because you don't have to hire a very expensive developer to maybe go solve the solution, or even if you go work with a services company to implement it, they can implement it much more quickly than they would if they had to go write code. And we're working with I'd say like a Fortune 100, like very large company. Just I was talking to this week, and they said, well, before we were talking about Power Apps all about like transformation, right? How do we go drive revenue forward? And now for the next 6 months, we're going to pivot and we're going to be focused on driving efficiencies in our business process and retiring other IT solutions which overlap and can be replaced with Power Apps. So they're now going to go hunt for like this licensing thing. They pay $1 million a year. This one, they pay $2 million a year. Can they just spend a little bit of effort, move that to Power Apps, and be able to shut down those licenses once and for all? So that's kind of the benefit of the flexibility of the platform, and just the ROI is so clean, that we think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity between Power Apps and Power Automate with the new RPA capabilities.
I want to talk about RPA in a second, but you did make a point there that it's funny how their original thought was to use it to grow revenue. And because of the situation we're in now, they're looking at another use case, which frankly was just as valid before any virus or anything else was out there. It's interesting that it took something like that to have them say, well, what's the other hugely obvious thing we could solve? You know?
Exactly.
So our RPA is an interesting one. There was a lot of talk at Summit about a lot of excitement about RPA, and I know that you're probably still somewhat limited on what you can talk about, but whatever you can say, what are you thinking about that?
Yeah. So the RPA, we're gonna be GAing that with the April wave. So wave 1. So just in a week or so, we announced the licensing details for RPA 4 weeks ago or so. I think on March 2nd. And what's exciting between the capabilities of it being a true low-code offering, like a typical Power Platform offering, plus the reasonable licensing options that we have, which are generally, like I'd say, the most affordable you're going to find out there for an RPA solution. We think we can actually start to democratize enterprise-grade automation, make it possible to really have business users, IT, pro developers, partners, service companies, all use the same platform to go automate and drive efficiencies. So that's the exciting bit. And because Power Automate and Flow have been around, Microsoft Flow before that had been around for a while, but have really been, I'd say, capped to a degree around personal and team and light departmental automation. But now with the RPA functionality, we're starting to see enterprise-wide, like invoice processing, quarterly earnings preparation, accounts, basically resolving receivable accounts, things like that. Very heavy workloads being built on top of Power Automate, the same low-code tool that's been there for a few years. So we're very excited about it for that reason. And in a world where you want to go trim costs, there's real opportunity to go drive efficiency using Power Automate over time.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. So it wouldn't be a talk with me if I didn't bust your balls about some stuff.
Let me hear it. What is it about?
So in one of our last calls, we talked about the hot topic at the time was about these API limits. And you said, this isn't something we want customers to think about. We actually thought of it more as like an asterisk on your cable bill. It shouldn't be a factor. Yet it continues to persist in people's minds. The conversation has not gone away. We've got people claiming that they're running into limits and doing stuff like that. And what are your thoughts around that now that it's actually out there and we're seeing how it's landed, in people's organizations?
Yeah. So, I mean, I do still hear a little bit of noise from customers and partners that are running into it. But it is dramatically less because it doesn't impact 99% of customers. Wouldn't impact 99% of customers. So since it's kind of rolled out, we've heard a lot less noise, but there still does exist some noise. And the thing that
would you call it air? I mean, would you just call it false noise? I mean, because you guys have the analytics in the background, what's exactly happening. If once you launch this, that suddenly half of our customer base is hitting this wall, and that that's not happening. So is it still kind of the feeling that the ones that are squawking either of that small percentage or just fear mongers?
Yeah. So I think I'd say I'd break down 3 very valid concerns that we hear. The first is we don't have enough reporting to make it clear and easy to understand where you stand for the API limits. Like we have early stage reporting in Power Platform Admin Center, but we don't have enough. So there's a lot of improvements coming for that by wave 2 of this year. So over the next 6 months, by the end of the next wave, release wave for Dynamics, you'll be able to go in and understand exactly how your API limits are being used and if there's any risk. And that's just going to be exposing telemetry that we ourselves look at today. And we think that will help with a lot of the concern that people are facing. So that's one. The second is we have people that are using a lot of the Dynamics products. They're using customer insights, they're using Power Apps, they're using customer engagement, they're using marketing. And their concern is all these application workflows, like imagine customer insights taking data from CE or marketing doing segmentation on CE, are actually generating a lot of API calls. So as they actually keep adding more and more apps, which we like, of course, and we think that's the whole special value prop of Dynamics. They are generating a huge amount of API calls. And so this is something we're going back and looking at to see how do we count the application API calls from Microsoft delivered apps, and also what API inclusions should come with those other licenses. So that is something we're looking at. And we don't have enforcement today, so people aren't really feeling the pinch, but people are looking at it and saying, hey, I can see that I'm making a lot of API calls because of these other apps. So that's the second one. And third thing is we have customers who are like have a web app or some other service which calls into CDS in the background, and that generates a lot of load. And that is causing friction. Those are probably the people that we intended to have impact from these changes. And because those are people where maybe they have 10 user licenses, but they generate like 1 billion API calls a day. So that's probably not correct. So, but we are seeing noise in a few places there. So, and that last one I think is probably we're not going to do anything to simplify, whereas the first two are things we're going to go try to simplify and improve over time.
A couple of other things before I let you go. One is, multiplexing is a concept that's been around for a very, very long time, back when we had CALs, back when it was physical apps installed on machines and stuff like that. Now we're in this kind of different world with all these cloud apps and services bumping into each other, but multiplexing is still this big gray box for lots of folks. And even in the Microsoft documentation, it's kind of contradictory in some places, but what's the story with, we got Salesforce connectors, we got SAP connectors, we've got all these other kinds of connectors that almost seem to be in direct conflict with some of this multiplexing. And how do you guys going to figure that out? What is multiplexing going to look like in the future?
Yeah, like I would say the spirit of the law when it comes to multiplexing is if you're doing something to reduce the number of user licenses you'd have to get for users, then you're probably doing multiplexing. And the problem is to convert that to a letter of the law is we create confusion historically to a degree, as well as accidentally prevent things that we don't want to prevent based on how the language is written. And I'll give an example. So like if I use a connector to say Salesforce or SAP, I still have to be licensed through Power Apps to Salesforce or SAP. Because you're running with your identity to Salesforce and SAP. So we feel like that's totally aligned with the spirit, and those partners feel good with it. One of the places where there was some weirdness was like, say I have a Power App connecting to my Dynamics CE data, but I'm not using any of the Dynamics CE logic. Is that multiplexing? Technically, 4 months ago, that was multiplexing as the way the licensing guide was written. But that was not the intent, and that was not the spirit of the law. So we've gone and changed that actually to say if you're licensed for Power Apps and you're running a Power App to connect to Dynamics data, but not using the Dynamics app logic or app experience, then that's totally fine and not multiplexing. And that was changed, I think, in late January, early February, because some people pointed out like this doesn't make sense. Then we said, you're right. That's not what we wanted to have this the impact of that being. So we went and changed it. But at its core, if you're doing something to circumvent a user license, and you'll know you're doing it because it will feel unnatural because the system's not built to behave that way. That's multiplexing and not allowed. Everything else, the intent is to have it be allowed.
So if your goal is to game the system, you're multiplexing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess basically, and you'll know it like just like if you're like, okay, I'm going to create one system account, and people will use a web portal I build in Azure, and the system account will then have to fake authorization talking to CDS. Like, you're like in bad territory when you're doing that.
A lot of that comes from customers. Customers like, can't we take a Power App and then have a custom entity that by workflow goes and recreates a record in a restricted entity? I'm like, no, what are you talking about? Anything you're doing to try and like go around the fence, is probably going to fall into that funny territory.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
and a challenge we always have is like, how do we convert these ideas into like digestible licensing guide? And I think it's almost like, and I don't want to do it it's almost like running a law, like legislating, but there are no judges to actually go interpret the law. So anyway.
Well, and we also know that when it's written down in a licensing guide, it almost might as well not be said. If we can't get it technically enforced at various levels. I mean, we can point back to the licensing guide. We as partners should be telling customers, yep, not allowed to do that. But without technical enforcement, these licensing guides are just something you could beat them over the head with when they misbehave. And speaking of restricted entities, when we last talked, you had mentioned, yep, there may be some more coming. That was a very long time ago. We haven't seen them. What is the thinking still along the lines of that is how we're going to kind of protect some of the first party IP, or we maybe have some different thoughts of different ways to protect it in this new world of a common data service, open source, data model, et cetera?
So we are working on something. I can't quite tip my hand yet. That will better allow you to share data and share schema from the common data model, the common data service, and the apps without running into the concept of premium entity or restricted entities. So there is something in the works that we're working towards. And I would say, like, at a high level, restricted entities as a concept are largely antithetical to our common data service, common data model vision. And they were just like the least bad option to go make sure that we appropriately can license Dynamics apps. So we are working feverishly on many proposals to get out of that restricted entity business, but still have a model which more appropriately captures and protects the value of the Dynamics apps without introducing restricted entities. So I'd say stay tuned. There definitely is the best minds are working on it. And I've seen a very digestible and good proposal that is kind of running up the chain right now that'll get us in a much better place later this year.
I had kind of had that assumption since, you talked about adding some and so much time had gone by. And my thinking was, because I never liked the idea of the restricted entities for reasons you just said, it kind of felt like a quick kind of down and dirty temporary solution. Yep. And I had the assumption that since we hadn't heard any more, that you guys were actually coming up with a better idea. So very glad to hear that. I'm sure everybody would be glad to hear that. So I know you got to get back to work. You're a busy guy. Anything else you want to convey to folks out there right now?
The biggest thing I would say, the biggest go-do I'd have for folks right now at this point in time would be go play with Power Automate, learn the new RPA functionality. It's a huge addition to Dynamics CE. It's a great thing for support and customer service workloads. It's a great thing for finance workloads. Like we have one customer that went from 22 like finance ops people down to 3 just using Power Automate and RPA. Plus, if you use Power Apps, it's a great way to go extend it. So I'd say go give Power Automate and RPA a try. That is the number one thing I think to pay attention to, and that's the number one thing I'm going to be talking about at the virtual launch event. So I'd say just that would be my call to action. That would be the one thing I'd say. And the second thing would be, I even wore a shirt thinking Steve would maybe video call me today, but it's too bad you can't see it.
Very nice.
But maybe I'll take a picture and send it to you about Merry Pigmas. So that's kind of the current state here as I work from home. But
we're all kind of letting the hair grow, and
I had a call with our PR and AR folks, like our analyst relations folks, and because I had an interview on Wednesday, and they said, you're going to shave, right? You're going to shave before you get on the camera with them. But anyway, exciting times.
Listen,
as always,
you never have to shave to talk to me.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate
All right, Charles, thanks
that.
for the time.
Yep. Always good to chat with you, Steve. Have a good weekend. Stay safe.